What if the great myths, the ones we dismiss as fanciful tales of ancient sun-baked cultures, were not fiction at all? What if they were warnings, not whispers across the centuries, but loud, echoing sirens that we, in our modern hubris, simply forgot how to hear? This is the core question that haunted Dr. Elias Vance, a man whose professional life was defined by the distant, cold light of the cosmos, but whose existence was about to be irrevocably consumed by a darkness that was both extraterrestrial and chillingly historical. Dr. Vance was, by all accounts, a quintessential British academic, meticulous, often irritable before his morning cuppa, and possessed of a formidable intellect. He held tenure at a quiet, prestigious research facility just outside Cambridge, a place of ivy-covered walls and whispered rivalries. His specialism was orbital mechanics, specifically the perturbations in the far reaches of the Oort cloud, the icy shell surrounding our solar system, a region conventionally thought to be static, silent, and entirely predictable. That predictability shattered on the 29th of December, nearly 3 years ago, when the newly commissioned high-resolution Sky Survey telescope, codenamed Argus, registered an anomaly. Not a transient blur, nor a statistical fluke, but a persistent, non-Keplerian light signature emanating from the constellation Ursa Major. This object was initially catalogued simply as 3I Atlas, an interstellar visitor, following the precedent of Oumuamua and Borisov. The initial consensus, celebrated in a frenzy of slightly too jolly press releases, was that this was merely another comet, rudely tossed from a neighboring star system. But Atlas was different. Its trajectory defied the elegance of Newtonian physics. It wasn't merely tumbling in a hyperbolic path, it seemed to be executing subtle, calculated adjustments. Dr. Vance, poring over the raw telemetry data late one frigid night in his cramped wood-paneled office, felt a prickle of unease that went beyond scientific curiosity. The office was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the server racks hidden behind a locked oak door. The air, typically smelling of old parchment and damp wool, felt charged, almost metallic. Vance ran the simulations again. He input variables for solar radiation pressure, interstellar dust drag, and the gravitational pull of every known body in the Milky Way. The results were consistent, terrifyingly so. The object, currently estimated to be roughly the size of a large regional county in England, was correcting its course. It was moving with intent. It was accelerating not randomly, but along a trajectory designed to intercept the ecliptic plane, the orbital path shared by Earth and its sibling planets, at a specific yet distant future point. The official report, drafted by a committee of highly placed administrators who rarely looked through a telescope themselves, dismissed these subtle deviations as minor statistical noise, likely caused by outgassing or inherent inaccuracies in the Argus detection system. Vance knew better. He knew the data was pristine. He began working alone, fueled by weak institutional coffee and stale digestive biscuits smuggled from the staff canteen. He retreated from the camaraderie of the common room, no more light banter about football or the atrocious state of the London Underground. His isolation was self-imposed, a necessary shield against the skepticism that would surely greet his hypothesis. His hypothesis was outlandish, even by the permissive standards of cutting-edge astrophysics. 3I Atlas was not a natural object. It was either a craft or a beacon, specifically directed towards our solar system. But why? And based on what intelligence? He began cross-referencing the orbital characteristics of Atlas with historical records of astronomical phenomena, searching for patterns, for echoes. It was a fishing expedition, a highly unorthodox detour for a respected academic. He delved into the archives of the British Museum, studying cuneiform tablets and ancient Sumerian cosmology, a field he had previously scoffed at as pseudoscience. The document spoke of the destroyer, the winged orb, and the celestial body that returned every great cycle, a harbinger of immense change, often catastrophic. They called it Nibiru. Vance, initially dismissive, began to notice the uncanny parallels between the mythological descriptions of Nibiru's orbit, a highly elliptical path that cut across the solar system, and the mathematically calculated trajectory of 3I Atlas. The ancient observers seemed to possess an astronomical insight that should have been utterly impossible for their era. The implications were staggering. If the ancient Sumerians were describing the same object currently barreling toward us, then this cycle was not new. It was a terrifying cosmic recurrence. If this beginning already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what lies ahead. If this beginning already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what lies ahead. So go ahead and leave your like and subscribe to the channel right now, because here, every video reveals something few dare to show. Vance felt the cold tendrils of genuine fear winding around him. This wasn't just a scientific puzzle. It was a potential existential threat wrapped in 6,000 years of forgotten history. His life, which had previously revolved around solving elegant equations, was now focused on decoding a catastrophic premonition. The academic pressure was mounting. His colleagues noticed his distraction, the deep shadows under his eyes. They offered polite, stiff upper lip inquiries about his latest obsession. Vance simply nodded, offered a clipped, "Everything is shipshape, thanks," and retreated back into the labyrinth of data and cuneiform translations. He knew that the moment he uttered the words Anunnaki or Nibiru in the common room, his career in the UK scientific establishment would be over. They would pack his things and label him a crank, a victim of too much caffeine and insufficient sleep. The stakes were too high for professional pride. The first breakthrough came not from the telescope, but from the spectrograph readings. 3I Atlas was emitting a highly unusual, almost impossible radiation signature. It wasn't the uniform thermal emission expected from a distant, cold comet. It was a structured burst, low frequency, repeating in complex, almost rhythmic patterns. He pulled up the spectral analysis, displayed across 3 large aging monitors. The patterns looked meaningless. Sharp peaks followed by long troughs, statistical noise. But Vance had spent his formative years in signal processing, a secondary field he had pursued almost as a hobby. He remembered a lecture on detecting intentionality in deep space noise, the difference between the static of the cosmos and a deliberate attempt to communicate or, perhaps, to warn. He applied a sophisticated mathematical filter, one originally developed for detecting submarine movements beneath the North Sea, adapting it for astronomical scales. The noise dissolved. What remained was a pure, complex signal. It wasn't a language we spoke now, but it possessed mathematical properties that suggested a highly advanced form of digital encoding. This was not noise. This was a message. The discovery was a seismic event in Vance's private world. He stared at the screen, the green waveforms throbbing like a pulse. This structure, this digital echo traveling across the void, confirmed his darkest suspicions. 3I Atlas was not random. It was a component of an ancient interstellar communication system, an object guided towards its target by intelligence. He worked through the night, the silence of the facility absolute, broken only by the chirping of a lone pigeon outside the window, overlooking the manicured lawns. His fingers flew across the keyboard, translating the complex mathematical matrices into geometric patterns, searching for a key, a Rosetta Stone hidden within the data. The question was no longer if something was coming, but what it meant for humanity. And more pressingly, for the residents of the British Isles who were currently preoccupied with the price of petrol and the latest gossip from Westminster. What would you do if you discovered that everything you believed about the origin of civilization was a carefully constructed lie designed to hide a recurring catastrophe? If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this narrative has struck a chord. Then strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this deep revelation. Dr. Vance recognized that the signal was not broadcasting information in the conventional sense. It was transmitting instructions, a beacon guiding 3i Atlas towards its intended destination within the solar system. The sheer audacity of the operation was staggering. It implied a civilization capable of interstellar guidance over vast temporal scales, operating on timelines that dwarfed the entire span of recorded human history. He needed proof of the origin, something definitive that linked the mathematical pattern to the Sumerian warnings. He remembered the specific details of the astronomical texts he had skimmed at the museum. The number 3600, known as Ashar, frequently referenced in conjunction with Nibiru's orbital period. He took the complex geometric patterns decoded from the Atlas signal and superimposed them onto the few surviving fragmentary drawings of the Sumerian celestial maps. The overlay was immediate and perfect. The signal contained astronomical coordinates for the solar system, specifically targeting the region between Mars and Jupiter where the asteroid belt resided, a region where, Sumerian texts hinted, a giant planet, Tiamat, once orbited before being destroyed by Nibiru on a previous pass. The implication was clear. The object 3i Atlas was following a path that had been pre-programmed thousands of years ago, perhaps even since the last confirmed passing of Nibiru. It was an alarm clock set for millennia. Vance felt a profound sense of temporal vertigo. He was standing in a modern office in the heart of England, yet he was touching the calculations of beings who predated the pyramids. The chill of the ancient past seemed to seep out of the monitors. He had to be cautious. Secrecy was paramount. He started encrypting his findings using a bespoke military-grade algorithm, a relic from his consultancy days with the MOD before the political fallout that led to his effective exile to academic life. He knew the institutional gaze was slow, but once it focused on him, it would be ruthless. His days became a torturous routine of decoding, simulation, and paranoia. He would spend hours meticulously reviewing the security footage archives of the research facility, ensuring no unusual vehicles, no black saloon cars or unmarked vans, had parked near his flat or the laboratory. He was British, so he inherently trusted the benign bureaucracy, but this knowledge was too explosive. It concerned not merely national security, but species-level survival. The descriptive detail of the signal itself demanded months of deep analysis. It was layered like a geological stratum, each frequency band carrying different levels of information. The basic carrier wave confirmed the trajectory and ETA, estimated time of arrival. A secondary encrypted layer contained what appeared to be biological and geological survey data, referencing Earth's atmospheric composition and dominant life forms. But the deepest layer, the one that truly chilled Vance to the bone, contained architectural schematics and engineering specifications. Vance sat in his small, meticulously organized flat, the scent of burnt toast lingering from his rushed breakfast. He used a powerful, yet illicitly acquired, computer cluster hidden in his basement to process the deepest data layers. Outside, the typical Cambridge drizzle painted the windows grey. He poured a small measure of single malt whiskey, the warmth offering fleeting comfort against the cold weight of his discovery. The deep data wasn't just descriptive, it was prescriptive. It detailed the necessary gravitational and magnetic modifications required to shift the Earth's axis slightly, a catastrophic event known in myth as the Great Deluge or the Worldwide Flood. It was a terraforming blueprint, but not for creation, for reset. The schematics pointed towards large, submersible vessels, self-regulating atmospheric processes, and, most horrifyingly, what appeared to be sophisticated genetic harvesting stations. The Anunnaki, if that's what they were, weren't coming to observe or to peacefully share wisdom. They were coming to reboot the system and likely to collect the assets they had sown thousands of years before. The stories of creation, of manipulating early hominids, suddenly gained a terrifying practical context. We were not children of God. We were an investment portfolio. Vance ran the gravity simulations based on the incoming mass of Atlas Nibiru. When it reached its perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, its gravitational influence would cause monumental tectonic shifts on Earth. Volcanoes would erupt globally, tidal waves would reshape continents, and the climate would plummet into a new, dark cycle. The signal wasn't just calculating these effects. The schematics implied they were intentional. He leaned back in his leather chair, the leather squeaking softly. His mind raced, calculating the odds. The established scientific community, entrenched in their comfortable paradigms, would require empirical evidence, a visual confirmation, before they even entertained the possibility of an extraterrestrial civilization, let alone one embedded in ancient mythology and bent on planetary restructuring. "Bloody hell," he muttered, using a mild curse that felt deeply inadequate for the scale of the impending global catastrophe. He needed to disseminate this information. But the MOD's history, with highly sensitive astronomical data, suggested a swift, ruthless suppression. The knowledge had to be public, irreversible, and undeniable. He had to translate the complex mathematics into a language that a frightened, skeptical populace could understand. He needed a legend, a journalist, or perhaps a well-known conspiracy theorist, anyone who could bypass the filters of institutionalized science. The pressure began to manifest physically. His hands, usually steady, now trembled slightly when holding his tea. The detailed expansion of his work, running into hundreds of pages of complex equations and Sumerian translations, began to feel less like research and more like drafting a very long, very detailed obituary for the human race. He meticulously documented every step, every source, creating a dead man's switch, a package of data set to release automatically if he failed to log in daily. This was his insurance policy against the black saloon cars he dreaded seeing parked outside his flat. He started compiling the visual evidence, the astronomical charts juxtaposed with the cuneiform tablets. The parallels were haunting, specific constellation alignments, the precise timing of past cataclysms, all mirroring the future path of 3i Atlas. Vance realized his obsession wasn't simply academic, it was personal. He had 2 young nieces living in Manchester, sweet girls who worried about their GCSEs and whether they'd get into their preferred universities. The thought of them facing a global reset, a deliberate, cold calculation by non-human intelligence, propelled him forward. He couldn't save the world, perhaps, but he could ensure the truth survived the deluge. This was the burden of the modern prophet, armed not with revelation, but with petabytes of terrifying data. He spent the next weeks focused solely on the deepest layer of the signal, the prescriptive data. It detailed not only the what, but the when of the Anunnaki's presence. They were not merely passing through, they intended to establish a temporary, highly secure base of operations. The schematics showed a complex docking maneuver involving Atlas, Nibiru, aligning it with Earth's magnetic poles to maximize gravitational leverage. The intent was not accidental collision, but surgical disruption. The decoding process reached a critical juncture when Vance managed to isolate the key that unlocked the Annunnaki's navigational log. The sheer computational power required was immense, taxing the limits of his hidden cluster, which now emitted a low, continuous roar from his basement, often rattling the antique china in the cupboard above. This log was the smoking gun, detailing past visits, previous resets, and most chillingly, the criteria for the current one. The log used epochs based on galactic cycles rather than Earth years, making translation difficult, but the patterns were undeniable. One entry, dated roughly 12,000 Earth years ago, described a harvest of genetic assets coinciding precisely with the end of the Younger Dryas period and the sudden rise of sophisticated megalithic architecture globally. The sudden shift from hunter-gatherers to builders of structures like Göbekli Tepe. It suggested that the Anunnaki initiated human civilization not out of benevolence, but as a long-term agricultural project. Dr. Vance, the man who had always believed in the slow, random, yet ultimately progressive march of evolution, now had to confront the possibility that humanity's advancement was less Darwinian struggle and more curated growth, a garden tended for future consumption. He detailed the engineering specifications found in the signal. The incoming object, 3I Atlas, was designed to cloak itself brilliantly in cosmic dust and cometary ice, giving it the appearance of a large, rogue comet. But beneath the icy veneer, the schematics revealed a dense, metallic core, heavily armored and equipped with colossal magnetic field generators. It wasn't a ship in the sense of a Millennium Falcon. It was a mobile, self-sustaining base, a flying fortress designed to withstand interstellar travel and execute planetary disruption. The internal structure confirmed the mythological descriptions of Nibiru being a planet populated by gods. The schematics showed vast internal caverns, pressurized and temperature-regulated, suitable for beings of colossal stature, far taller and heavier than standard humans, corroborating descriptions of the Anunnaki found in archaeological digs across Mesopotamia. Vance spent a long afternoon reviewing the data, pausing only to retrieve a fresh pot of tea. He noticed the way the fading autumn light slanted through his flat window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The mundane beauty of his quiet life suddenly felt incredibly fragile. What was the point of tenure or a meticulously maintained garden if the very planet was scheduled for a gravitational tilt? He needed to confirm the biological implications. He managed to secure, through highly unethical means, involving an old university friend now working at the Natural History Museum, digitized copies of highly restricted, non-public analyses of hominid DNA from early settlements. He compared the genetic markers referenced in the Anunnaki signal's biological survey layer with the human DNA. The comparison was devastating. A significant portion of the human genome carried markers that were clearly engineered, introduced roughly 400,000 years ago, a period that also correlates with major cultural shifts described in Sumerian mythology. The signal contained the key to these markers, suggesting a way to activate, deactivate, or perhaps extract them. The knowledge was now a physical weight in his chest. He was carrying the secret of human origin and imminent doom. He decided he needed to move the data physically. Digital security, even his bespoke system, was always vulnerable. He needed a physical bolt hole, a secure location far from the metropolitan areas of southeast England where surveillance was tight. He thought immediately of his old mentor, Professor Alistair Finch, a crusty, eccentric astronomer who had retired years ago to a remote cottage on the Isle of Skye. Finch was paranoid, brilliant, and disconnected from the institutional hierarchy. He was the perfect unwilling ally. But the physical transfer of 14 terabytes of highly classified information, including the decoded Anunnaki blueprints and the corresponding genetic analysis, required careful planning. He couldn't simply take the ferry across to Skye. He would be watched. He began orchestrating a series of diversions. First, he published a paper on a completely unrelated, highly obscure subject, the orbital mechanics of a distant, irrelevant asteroid, filling it with deliberate, subtle errors, guaranteed to provoke a lengthy, distracting debate among his colleagues. This would establish his current focus as harmlessly academic. Second, He set up a highly visible surveillance feed on his office computer, showing harmless solar flare activity, while simultaneously routing the truly explosive data through a series of Cold War-era VPNs and proxy servers based in Eastern Europe, disguising the massive data transfer as trivial administrative traffic. The tension wasn't just in the cosmos. It was in the tight knot forming in Dr. Vance's stomach as he realized the scale of his insubordination. He was crossing lines he swore he never would: hacking, theft, and deliberate deception of the Crown. But what was the Crown compared to the threat of cosmic servitude? He prepared his go-bag, a standard British rucksack, filled not with mountaineering gear, but with solid-state drives, spare batteries, a burner phone purchased in a dodgy market in Manchester, and enough non-perishable rations for a week. He included a copy of the History of the Sumerian Civilization, annotated with his deciphering notes, just in case the data drives were somehow destroyed. As he closed the heavy canvas bag, the weight of the drive felt like the fate of the world. He checked his watch. 03 GMT. Time to move. His escape had to be seamless, blending into the early morning quiet of the university town. He paused for a moment by the window, gazing out at the ancient walls of the university. You already stopped to think about it, didn't you? If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this narrative has struck a chord. Then strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this deep revelation. Vance's escape from Cambridge was meticulously planned, executed with the precision of a man who understood angles and timing better than human interaction. He didn't use his own car. That would be too traceable. Instead, he relied on the labyrinthine public transport system, the great sprawling web of the United Kingdom, designed to confuse the casual observer. The pre-dawn air at Cambridge Station was heavy with the smell of wet pavement and diesel fumes. Vance, dressed in nondescript outdoor gear, a tweed jacket and sturdy hiking boots, making him look like a perfectly typical academic heading for a field trip to the Peak District, joined the sparse queue for the London train. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, muffled only slightly by the thick jumper he wore. He knew they wouldn't miss the data immediately, but the absence of Dr. Elias Vance would raise flags by noon. He had set up a complex system of automated emails and staged meetings, creating the illusion that he was sequestered in a remote meeting in Scotland, precisely where he intended to end up. The journey to King's Cross was uneventful, a blur of grey fields and commuter faces buried in newspapers or smartphones. Vance didn't dare touch his phone. He sat perfectly still, observing every face, every slight movement in the carriage. Paranoia, he reasoned, was merely heightened awareness when facing an existential threat. In London, he plunged into the chaos of the underground. He changed lines 3 times, ensuring his movements were recorded by as many different CCTV cameras as possible, deliberately confusing the route for anyone attempting to track him digitally. The noise and rush of the Victoria line, usually irritating, now provided excellent cover. He purchased a one-way ticket to Fort William, Scotland, the furthest point north accessible by a single continuous railway journey, using cash drawn from a long-dormant offshore account. The final leg of the journey, the overnight sleeper train known affectionately as the Caledonian Sleeper, was where Vance truly began to breathe, though the air in the small, compact cabin was dry and stale. The rhythm of the train wheels against the rails provided a hypnotic soundtrack to his fear. As the train rolled north, leaving the sprawling lights of Birmingham and Manchester behind, the landscape outside the window transformed into the vast, dark expanse of the Scottish Highlands. It was during this long journey that Vance opened his secondary, offline laptop, a relic from 2005, running an obscure operating system, to review the final decrypted files concerning the Anunnaki's Dark Cycle protocol. The Dark Cycle was, essentially, a scheduled environmental reset keyed to the gravitational influence of Nibiru. The signal indicated that the primary purpose of Atlas was to act as a trigger, a highly precise mass designed to pass close enough to Earth's core magnetic field to initiate a geophysical cascade. This wasn't an extinction event in the way of an asteroid strike. It was controlled destruction, targeting the structures of human society while preserving the planetary biosphere for future resource extraction. The blueprints showed that once the gravitational tilt was initiated, the Anunnaki intended to descend in massive, column-like ships, the pillars of heaven, mentioned in various ancient texts, to establish deep-sea bases using the chaos to move unnoticed. These bases, detailed in the architectural schematics, were vast, self-sustaining habitats designed to survive millennia of geological turmoil, waiting for the Earth to stabilize before initiating the next phase of the project. This knowledge illuminated the deepest secrets of the Sumerian pantheon. The gods were geological engineers. The great floods were not divine punishment, but necessary collateral damage in a cosmic farming operation. The thought brought a bitter taste to Vance's mouth like old pennies. He spent hours trying to find a countermeasure within the Anunnaki's own documentation, a flaw in the design, a shutdown sequence. But the ancient architecture was pristine, designed to operate without failure over millions of years. The only way to stop the trigger was to physically divert 3I Atlas, an act that would require astronomical resources and global political will, neither of which he possessed. He arrived in Fort William in the early morning, the air crisp and biting, carrying the sharp, clean scent of peat smoke and damp heather. The atmosphere was rugged, untamed, a stark contrast to the sterile, calculated world he had just fled. Professor Finch's cottage was another 4 hours' drive, deep into the remote wilderness of Skye. Vance hired a battered, ancient Land Rover from a local garage, paying in unmarked bills, and headed into the misty, formidable landscape. The road quickly deteriorated into a rough, single-track lane, flanked by towering, ominous Munros, Scottish mountains. The sheer physical scale of the Highlands began to put his worries into a slightly different perspective. Here, humans were insignificant against the geological vastness, yet even this ancient, seemingly timeless landscape was now threatened by a force arriving from beyond the stars. He reached the cottage just as the sun broke through the thick cloud cover, casting sharp, fleeting shadows. Finch's home was exactly as Vance remembered, a squat stone structure, heavily fortified against the notorious Scottish weather, surrounded by sheep and endless bogland. A large radio telescope dish, clearly homemade and rusting gently, dominated the small garden. He knocked on the heavy oak door. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the moor. Alistair Finch, older, frailer, but with the same fiercely intelligent wild eyes, opened the door. He wore a moth-eaten cardigan and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and ammonia. "Elias Vance? Good heavens, lad, you look like you've seen a ghost, or worse, a funding committee." Finch's voice was a gravelly baritone, carrying the remnants of a strong Glasgow accent. Vance stepped inside, dropping his heavy rucksack onto the flagstone floor. The cottage interior was warm, cluttered with antique astronomical equipment and stacks of books that reached the ceiling. "Worse than that, Alistair," Vance said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "I think the myths are true, and I need access to your deep-range receiver array immediately." Finch, without a flicker of surprise, merely nodded. He had always believed the universe was far stranger than the textbooks allowed. "Tea first," Finch declared, already moving towards the kettle. "Then we can discuss the return of the Ancient Ones." The exchange was terrifyingly casual, confirming to Vance that he had finally found someone capable of understanding the magnitude of the truth. While Finch busied himself with the strong Scottish tea, Vance began unloading the hard drives, connecting them to Finch's bespoke, heavily shielded computer system. "You already paused for reflection here, didn't you? What would happen if this quiet moment of scientific collaboration was interrupted?" If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this narrative has struck a chord. Then strengthen this content. Like it now and share it with someone who needs to see this deep revelation. The next 2 days were an intensive, almost manic session of collaborative research, fueled by strong tea, Finch's terrible cooking, and the stark reality of the incoming threat. Professor Finch, despite his age, displayed a breathtaking mental agility, quickly grasping the intricate geometry of the Anunnaki signal and the profound implications of the genetic harvest data. Finch's immediate concern was the intent. "They're not just flattening the topography, Elias," Finch observed, tapping a long, bony finger on a schematic of the submerged base. "They're ensuring the survival of specific biospheres, presumably ones they deem crucial for their long-term interests. And look at this, the structural integrity models for the deep-sea bases require zero geological activity for at least 3 millennia after the shift. They are resetting Earth to a primordial, controllable state." Vance confirmed this grim assessment. The dark cycle isn't just about Nibiru passing, it's about using the orbital passage to induce a global upheaval that eradicates complex, developed human infrastructure, our cities, our power grids, our global communications, while retaining the underlying biological resource. We are being pruned. Finch's remote observatory array, which he maintained with meticulous care and several layers of black market wiring, was crucial. It wasn't powerful enough for deep space detection, but it was excellent for receiving and amplifying weak signals within the solar system, especially those hidden behind standard stellar noise. They pointed Finch's crude-looking yet astonishingly sensitive radio dish towards the direction of 3i Atlas. Vance needed independent confirmation of the signal's stability and power. The data streamed in, confirming every aspect of Vance's earlier decryption. The signal was now increasing in intensity, shifting from a subtle guide frequency to a powerful, complex broadcast. "They're preparing to communicate locally," Finch mused, adjusting the dial on the receiver, which hissed and crackled with static. "Not with us, necessarily, but with their own automated systems already in place on Earth. Ancient infrastructure." This led them to a terrifying revelation. The Anunnaki were not arriving in an empty world. Their signal contained protocols for activating dormant, highly resilient technology embedded deep within the Earth's crust, specifically targeting areas around the Middle East, the Andes, and the ancient plains of Salisbury, England. The British Isles, steeped in myth and historical architecture, suddenly gained a new, sinister importance. Stonehenge, Avebury, and other Neolithic monuments were perhaps not simple burial grounds or celestial clocks, but highly localized energy conduits, dormant relays designed to receive commands from Nibiru's approach. Vance zoomed in on the schematics detailing the Salisbury Plain activation sequence. The coordinates matched Stonehenge precisely. The complex, megalithic structure, whose construction still mystifies archaeologists, was designed to function as a powerful, low-frequency transducer capable of influencing subterranean magnetic currents. "They aren't just adjusting the orbit. They are tuning the Earth itself," Finch whispered, the magnitude of the ancient technology leaving even the seasoned professor momentarily speechless. The detailed expansion of the Salisbury schematics revealed the structure's true purpose. A massive, localized electromagnetic pulse generator designed to knock out modern electronics and communications across a huge swathe of Western Europe just prior to the gravitational shift. The gods required darkness and confusion for their arrival. Vance, sitting in the warm glow of the computer monitor, felt the weight of history press down on him. All the theories of ancient astronauts, dismissed with intellectual contempt for decades, were proving chillingly accurate. He had always sought the truth in the sterile logic of mathematics. Now he found it in the brutal, pragmatic reality of ancient extraterrestrial colonization. The immediate challenge was dissemination. They had the truth, but they lacked the platform. Trying to publish this through conventional scientific journals would result in immediate seizure by the British intelligence services. Leaking it to the press would simply result in the story being branded as sensationalist rubbish and quickly debunked by government-controlled experts. "We need noise, Elias. Lots of it," Finch stated, stirring his tea thoughtfully. "We need to flood the information space with the truth, so fast and so wide that they can't possibly contain it all. We need a digital deluge to precede the physical one." Finch produced a small, leather-bound notebook from a secured drawer, a relic from his Cold War days working on signals intelligence. It contained a list of highly unorthodox contacts, disgruntled ex-intelligence officers, independent cyber-anarchists, and radical truth-seekers scattered across Europe and the Commonwealth. They decided on a multi-pronged approach. 1. The scientific drop, releasing the raw, unadulterated data, orbital mechanics, spectral analysis, and gravitational simulations onto various highly trafficked scientific repositories disguised as unverified preliminary data from a fictional South American observatory. 2. The historical leak, releasing the translated Sumerian tablets cross-referenced with the Nibiru schematics onto dedicated history forums and conspiracy websites, places where the truth might find purchase among those already predisposed to distrust mainstream narratives. 3. The media bomb, creating a short, highly edited video detailing the countdown and the immediate consequences, aimed at maximum emotional impact, and uploading it simultaneously across hundreds of social media platforms via an automated botnet. The clock was ticking. Their calculated ETA for 3i Atlas to reach the threshold of catastrophic influence was less than 5 months. This wasn't a time for academic debate. It was a race against the calendar. As Vance worked, reviewing the global implications, he felt a strange sense of resignation. His purpose was no longer to prevent the inevitable, but to ensure humanity faced it with open eyes. The Scottish wind howled outside, a deep, mournful sound, matching the dread in his heart. He looked at Finch, now absorbed in refining the broadcast frequency. "What happens if we succeed, Alistair? If the world knows, what do they do with 5 months of notice?" Finch didn't look up, his voice low and pragmatic. "Panic, mostly. But panic with knowledge is better than blissful ignorance, Elias. At least some will try to build arks, figuratively or literally. We give them a fighting chance, even if it's just 1 in 1,000. This mission, hidden in a remote cottage far from the institutional eyes of London, was the final, desperate gamble of 2 disgraced British scientists against a cosmic schedule set long before the dawn of man. What choices would you make if the timeline for saving humanity was less than half a year? If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this narrative has struck a chord. Then strengthen this content. Like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this deep revelation. The air inside the cottage was thick with the metallic smell of overloaded electronics and the nervous energy of 2 men working past the point of exhaustion. The data package was ready, compressed, encrypted, and splintered into hundreds of smaller files ready for the global deployment. They named the package Prometheus. Suddenly, the silence of the moor was shattered. A deep, continuous rumble vibrated through the flagstone floor, escalating quickly into the unmistakable sound of heavy engines approaching rapidly. It wasn't the local postal lorry. Finch, whose senses were attuned to the slightest deviation in the landscape's routine, straightened instantly. His hand went to a dusty but well-oiled antique shotgun mounted above the fireplace. "They've found us, Elias. Bloody swift work too," Finch muttered, his eyes narrowing with a grim acceptance. Vance scrambled to disconnect the hard drives, grabbing the essential data keys. Small, titanium memory sticks containing the encryption sequence for the Prometheus drop. He had known this moment was inevitable, yet the sudden, brutal intrusion was jarring. Through the small window, Vance saw them, 3 heavy-duty black Land Rovers, the type used by the MOD Special Forces, pulling up abruptly, their tires churning the peat and mud. Figures clad in dark, nondescript tactical gear, clearly professionals, not local police, piled out. They moved with coordinated efficiency, surrounding the isolated cottage. "The radio dish, Alistair. They'll target the dish first," Vance urged, already calculating the line of fire. "Too late for that, lad," Finch replied calmly, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. "But we might buy you 5 minutes. Get to the back door, now. Take the path through the bog. They won't expect anyone to run through that muck." Finch didn't intend to run. He intended to create a diversion. Vance looked at his mentor, his eyes conveying a silent, desperate gratitude. "Give 'em hell, Alistair. Always, Elias. Now go. The truth is more important than this old carcass." Vance grabbed his rucksack, slung it over his shoulder, and sprinted through the cramped kitchen towards the back door. The sound of heavy boots hitting the front door signaled the start of the assault. Vance burst out the back, momentarily blinded by the sudden shift in light. He immediately plunged into the thick, treacherous bogland behind the cottage. The ground was soft, sucking mud, interspersed with hidden pools of water. It was a miserable route, but one that Finch had calculated would slow down the urban-trained operatives. Behind him, the air filled with the sharp crack of the old shotgun, followed quickly by the rapid, controlled burst of automatic weapon fire. Finch was making his final stand, ensuring the Prometheus keys remained mobile. Vance ran blindly, the cold, wet air burning his lungs. The heavy mud pulled at his boots, making every step an exhausting effort. He didn't look back, focusing only on the distant low ridgeline. The fate of the truth depended on his ability to outrun a highly trained, state-sanctioned retrieval team across a miserable, unforgiving landscape. He heard the roar of a helicopter overhead. They had air support. They were not taking any chances. He scrambled to find cover, diving behind a cluster of ancient moss-covered boulders, pulling his rucksack tight against his body. The military operation was chillingly precise. They weren't just searching, they were hunting. The helicopter swept low, its spotlight carving harsh beams through the mist. Vance lay utterly still, covered in cold-smelling mud, trying to regulate his panicked breathing. Lying there, pressed against the cold, damp earth of the highlands, Vance felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The vastness of the conspiracy, the antiquity of the threat, and the immediate, deadly presence of his own government, all combined into a crushing reality. He was a fugitive, hunted by his own people for revealing a cosmic truth. He waited for what felt like an eternity, the spotlight passing dangerously close overhead. He calculated the helicopter's search pattern. It was methodical, predictable. He had a small window. When the chopper swung away to cover the western ridge, Vance moved again, pushing his exhausted body through the thicket of gorse and heather. He headed towards the coast, towards a small fishing village Finch had mentioned, a place where anonymity might still exist. He had to assume Finch was captured, or worse. The loss of his mentor, the last person who fully grasped the technical details of the Nibiru signal, was a heavy blow. Now, the full burden of releasing the Prometheus data rested solely on Vance. He finally reached the relative safety of the main road, muddy and shivering violently. He had to ditch the rucksack, too heavy, too noticeable. He stripped the essential drives and placed them in the inner pockets of his tweed jacket, trusting the tough fabric to protect them. He then began walking, blending his appearance into that of a thoroughly miserable hiker who had suffered an unfortunate tumble in the bog. His destination, a small, dilapidated fishing trawler owned by a contact of Finch's, a former naval engineer named MacLeod, known for his discretion and his severe distrust of all governmental bodies, especially those from London. The physical ordeal of the escape only strengthened Vance's resolve. He was no soldier, no spy. He was an academic who had been forced into the role of a desperate prophet. He had seen the blueprints for the destruction of civilization, and he would not let it happen in silence. As he walked, his mind returned to the schematics of the Salisbury transducer. If the MOD was hunting him, it meant they knew about the Anunnaki and were actively participating in the cover-up. They were likely securing the ancient sites, preparing for the electromagnetic pulse that would silence the world. The silence before the storm. He focused on the immediate task, reaching MacLeod. He knew that the MOD would soon establish roadblocks and begin tracking all vehicular and pedestrian traffic in the area. He had to be quick, leveraging the brief period of confusion caused by Finch's heroic distraction. The cold truth was that the Anunnaki's dark cycle was approaching faster than anyone realized. The faint hum of the incoming celestial object was getting louder, not acoustically, but in the growing instability of Earth's magnetic field, a fact that, currently, only 2 men, and likely the MOD's secretive intelligence branch, truly understood. Did you feel the sudden shift in urgency? How long do you think, Doctor? Vance has before his face is plastered on every police notice board across the UK. Vance arrived in the tiny, wind-battered fishing village of Portree just as the sun was dipping below the Atlantic horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The village smelled strongly of salt, fish and old diesel. He avoided the main street, sticking to the damp, shadowed back alleys, moving like a ghost. He found the harbour easily. MacLeod's trawler, the Storm Petrel, was a sturdy, if ancient vessel, docked at the furthest, darkest pier. MacLeod himself was a man forged by the relentless Scottish seas, weathered, silent, and with hands like industrial vices. Vance approached the deck cautiously. "MacLeod, Finch sent me." MacLeod, who was adjusting a thick rope, didn't stop or look up. "Aye. He said if he ever sent a frantic-looking professor covered in bog mud, I was to take him across the Minch and ask no bloody questions. Get aboard, Elias. You're attracting too much attention." The brevity of the exchange was a relief. MacLeod was the antidote to the bureaucratic nonsense Vance had just escaped. Vance clambered onto the deck. The trawler was cramped and oily. MacLeod immediately cast off, the heavy diesel engine coughing to life, enveloping them in a cloud of thick, pungent smoke. Within minutes they were navigating out of the sheltered harbour and into the rougher waters of the channel, heading for the anonymity of the open sea. The voyage was brutal. The Storm Petrel bucked violently against the rough, cold waves. Vance, huddled below deck in the tiny, damp cabin, used the time to process the sheer volume of the Prometheus data one last time. He needed to be absolutely certain of the core message before he released it. The most damning piece of information was the Anunnaki Arrival Zero protocol. This segment of the signal detailed the precise method by which the incoming ships would achieve atmospheric entry during the global seismic event. It mentioned using existing gravitational anomalies, ancient subtle energy points on Earth, to mask their descent and manage the colossal deceleration. Vance cross-referenced these gravitational points with major fault lines. The data revealed that the Anunnaki had carefully chosen their past and future landing sites to correspond with areas where tectonic plates were naturally unstable, allowing for maximum planetary disruption with minimum energy expenditure on their part. They were exploiting Earth's vulnerabilities with chilling efficiency. MacLeod checked on him periodically, offering a mug of scalding strong tea and a silent nod. He asked nothing about the military presence back on Skye or the fate of Finch. He seemed to understand that the less he knew, the better. "Where are we heading, MacLeod?" Vance asked finally, his voice thick with cold. "Outer Hebrides, island of Barra. We know a cave there. Nobody goes there now. Good spot for a broadcast if you're planning on upsetting the Queen," MacLeod grunted, adjusting the course. The Outer Hebrides, a perfect remote base of operations. Vance knew that the logistical difficulties of the MOD tracking a rogue academic across the remote Scottish islands would severely hamper their efforts, buying him valuable time. He focused on the crucial next step, translating the complex gravitational data into a simple visual warning. He needed a graphic that showed the Earth tilting, the seas rising, and the timeline flashing ominously. He began sketching crude animations on his secondary laptop, simplifying the geometry of the catastrophic pole shift. The magnitude of the gravitational shift described in the Annunaki signal was immense, a 26-degree tilt of the Earth's axis, resulting in the instant redistribution of massive oceanic and atmospheric masses. Coastlines would vanish, and the world's climate zones would be violently rearranged. The tropical regions would freeze, and the current polar caps would melt rapidly. This phenomenon, Vance realized, explained the pervasive myths of the Age of Ice, followed by the Great Warming, that punctuate ancient cultures globally. The Anunnaki were not only real, they were the engine of global cataclysm. The urgency was palpable. The current atmospheric analysis section of the signal showed a rising concentration of specific metallic isotopes in the upper atmosphere, elements not native to Earth, a precursor to the gravitational field manipulation. The clock wasn't ticking in months or weeks anymore. It was ticking in days until the preemptive phase began. He needed to establish a broadcast link immediately upon reaching Bara. McLeod assured him that the cave contained old maritime communication equipment, a relic of wartime signal relays capable of broadcasting at high power across a wide spectrum, potentially disrupting established communication channels. Vance found a moment of grim humor in the situation. He, a mild-mannered academic who enjoyed quiet evenings of Bach and dry sherry, was now preparing a global truth bomb using antique radio equipment in a cave on a remote Scottish island, all while dodging the finest military intelligence the British Empire could muster. He spent the rest of the journey meticulously writing the accompanying text for the Prometheus data leak, a manifesto, a call to arms, framed in the sober, verifiable language of science, stripped of all sensationalism, relying purely on the mathematical impossibility of Three-Eye Atlas's current trajectory being natural. He addressed the document directly to the people, bypassing the corrupted channels of government and institutions. He titled the manifesto, "The 3600-Year Lie, Evidence of Scheduled Cataclysm." The sound of the trawler engine slowing pulled Vance from his work. They were nearing Bara. The darkness was absolute, save for the navigation lights of the storm petrel and the faint glow of the stars, stars that now felt less like distant wonders and more like the silent, complicit witnesses to humanity's impending trial. You feel the cold and the dampness of the trawler, don't you? What final message would you encode in your last transmission? If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this narrative has struck a chord. Then, strengthen this content. Like it now and share it with someone who needs to see this deep revelation. The landing on Bara was treacherous. McLeod guided the storm petrel into a narrow hidden inlet, a secret cove known only to a few local fishermen. They offloaded the minimal equipment in absolute silence, navigating the slippery rocks by the faint, diffused light of the full moon. The cave was exactly as McLeod described, vast, damp, and smelling of brine and ancient stone. Deep within, shielded from the wind and the gaze of any passing aerial surveillance, sat the relic communications station. It was a complex array of vacuum tubes, heavy-duty amplifiers, and ancient transmitters, all surprisingly well-maintained. "It still runs on diesel generators," McLeod explained, pointing towards a massive, loud engine tucked into a side cavern. "Needs a lot of fuel, but it'll punch through anything the MOD tries to jam." Vance set up his laptop amidst the archaic equipment. The contrast was startling. The sleek, modern flash drives containing the apocalypse data next to the hulking, green-painted machinery of 1940s technology. His immediate priority was establishing the satellite uplink for the Prometheus data bomb. While the radio would handle the local broadcast, he needed a high-speed, secure channel to distribute the terabytes of raw evidence globally. He located an old, disused weather balloon launch facility nearby, a piece of Cold War infrastructure abandoned decades ago. MacLeod had acquired a powerful, militarized satellite dish, a remnant of the Falklands War, and had jury-rigged it to fit into the cave system, pointing the heavily modified dish through a natural aperture in the rock ceiling. The setup was slow, painstaking work, wrestling with rusty bolts and complex wiring diagrams scrawled on brittle paper. Vance felt the weight of the task pressing down on him. This wasn't just about sharing a story. It was about ensuring the integrity of the data drop against anticipated state-level interference. The decoding of the Anunnaki signal continued to reveal terrifying layers of detail. Now, Vance focused on the genetic harvest schematics. They detailed a process of selective preservation. Not all humans were targeted for extraction. Only those carrying specific, highly complex genetic markers associated with enhanced cognitive function and specific physical resilience, were deemed valuable assets. This horrifying selection process added a new, colder dimension to the myths of the chosen ones, or the seeds of Adam. It was genetic quality control. The vast majority of the population were considered expendable collateral, necessary waste in the planetary reset. Vance found himself searching his own genome, mentally reviewing his family history, desperate to know if his bloodline carried the terrifying mark of value. The uncertainty was almost as bad as certain doom. He quickly pushed the thought away. His mission was not self-preservation, but disclosure. As the systems began to come online, the old generators rumbling loudly, Vance prepared the final command sequence for the mass release. He was targeting key distribution networks, academic servers, activist platforms, secure communication hubs in Iceland, Switzerland, and New Zealand, countries he assessed as having the highest chance of resisting immediate governmental seizure of the data. While waiting for the satellite connection to stabilize, he turned his attention to the local radio broadcast. This needed to be a powerful, emotional summary, stripped of scientific jargon, designed to shock and inform the average British citizen. He began writing his broadcast script, focusing on the cultural references that would resonate immediately. The chalk-white horses of Wiltshire, the ancient standing stones, the familiar sight of the constellations in the winter sky, all now revealed as components of an alien machine, a cosmic weapon aimed at their very existence. Tonight, I address you not as Dr. Elias Vance, but as a man who has witnessed the blueprints for global catastrophe. What you have been told is the history of mankind is a lie. We were not created for worship, but for service. And the time for the harvest is upon us. The object, 3I Atlas, known in ancient texts as Nibiru, is not a comet. It is a tool, guided by an intelligence that predates humanity, and its arrival is scheduled to reset our world through a violent, calculated pole shift. Look to the skies, look to the ancient places. They are stirring, waiting for the command. This is not a drill, this is the truth. He read the script aloud, his voice echoing eerily off the cave walls. It sounded dramatic, bordering on mad, but the underlying data was sound. He just needed to convey the scientific certainty with the urgency of a public service announcement. MacLeod returned, carrying fresh supplies and news of the outside world. He had managed to pick up snippets of radio chatter on his marine band. The MOD has locked down Sky, Elias. They're searching every flat, every lorry, every fishing boat. They've put out a description. They're calling you an agent of a hostile foreign power attempting to destabilize national security, MacLeod reported, his face grim. Vance nodded. That was the predictable narrative. Label the truth-teller a spy, and the message loses credibility instantly. It only reinforced the need for the Prometheus data to speak for itself. He checked the satellite link. Stable. The initial upload sequence was ready. The countdown was set for 0300 GMT, the absolute quietest hour of the global digital day. Standing on the precipice of releasing the most profound secret in human history, Vance felt a strange calm. He had faced his fear, endured the pursuit, and secured the means of dissemination. The rest was up to fate and the resilience of human skepticism. Imagine that moment of decision, the finger hovering over the upload button. What single word would you use to describe the world waiting for this message? The time was 02:59 GMT. The air in the cave was vibrating with the combined noise of the ancient diesel generator and the high-frequency whine of the satellite transmitter. Vance sat hunched over the keyboard, his face lit by the cold glow of the screen. MacLeod stood watch near the entrance, a silent, imposing guardian against the rising tide of state surveillance. At exactly 03 GMT, Vance executed the command. The Prometheus data package, 14 terabytes of orbital mechanics, spectral analysis, geological schematics, and the damning genetic harvest protocols, was unleashed. It fragmented instantly, routing through 1,000 different encrypted channels, saturating scientific servers, dark web forums, and the personal email addresses of thousands of influential journalists and academics across the globe. Simultaneously, the ancient radio transmitter in the cave sprang to life, amplifying Vance's recorded, sober voice, broadcasting the 3,600-year lie manifesto across the airwaves of the UK, overriding local radio stations and cutting into dormant military frequencies. Vance watched the transmission status bar fill with an agonizing slowness. He knew that the moment the upload was complete, his window of safety would snap shut. The global intelligence community would instantly pinpoint the source of the unprecedented data flow. The initial reaction was not immediate panic, but disbelief, followed by a frantic attempt at damage control. Within minutes, the first reports filtered back. Academic server administrators reporting massive, unscheduled data spikes. Governments scrambling to identify the source of the highly disruptive, unsanctioned radio broadcast. Vance and MacLeod stayed put for 2 more hours, ensuring the Prometheus payload had achieved sufficient distribution velocity. They had to assume that within the hour, every major intelligence agency, from MI6 in London to the NSA in Washington, would be coordinating a massive counter-operation. While waiting, Vance used Finch's specialized receiver to monitor the status of 3i Atlas itself. The signal intensity had increased further. It was no longer just a guided beacon. It was actively modulating Earth's atmospheric pressure, a subtle but measurable sign that the preemptive phase of the dark cycle had begun. He isolated the final, deepest layer of the signal, the specific command sequence that would be sent to the dormant terrestrial structures, like Stonehenge. This command was a sequence of low-frequency vibrations, a geological tuning fork designed to resonate with the specific rock composition of the ancient sites, activating their electromagnetic potential. The most profound secret, however, lay not in the mechanism of destruction, but in the purpose of the return. Why, if the Anunnaki were so advanced, did they only return every 3,600 years? The signal provided the answer in complex biological terms: their lifespan. The Anunnaki required highly specific, rare isotopes found in abundance only in the atmosphere of Nibiru during its close approach to the inner solar system, and their long cycle was dictated by the necessity of this interstellar resource gathering. Earth and its genetically engineered inhabitants were merely a subsidiary project, a self-sustaining asset pool managed between these vast cycles. This realization hammered home the scale of human insignificance. We were not even worthy of immediate focused destruction. We were simply being reset so the environment remained stable for their next scheduled visit, millennia from now. At 05 GMT, Vance finally shut down the satellite transmitter. The mission was complete. The truth was loose, scattered across the digital wind, impossible to fully recall. "We need to move, MacLeod. They'll be on us soon." Vance said, his voice flat with exhaustion and triumph. MacLeod was already breaking down the generator, silencing the deafening noise. "Aye, but we've bought ourselves a few hours. I have another boat hidden further north. We can disappear into the fishing fleet for a while." They packed only the essential decryption keys and Vance's laptop, abandoning the bulky old radio equipment. As they hiked back towards the secondary cove, the dawn broke across the Atlantic. The light revealed the island in stark clarity, rugged, remote, and now a temporary sanctuary from global forces. Vance felt a sliver of hope. He had done his part. The seed of doubt, the irrefutable data, was now in the hands of the global scientific community. Whether they chose to acknowledge it or deny it was their choice, but they could no longer claim ignorance. He looked up at the sky, searching for the first faint light of 3I Atlas. It was still too distant, still cloaked by dust, but he knew it was there, a looming shadow rapidly gaining speed, following the ancient instructions. This wasn't the end of the story, merely the end of the prologue. The world was now aware of the Anunnaki signal, and the clock was ticking faster than ever. You now possess the secret. How would you convince the skeptical world of this cosmic truth before the skies start to tear apart? The global reaction to the Prometheus data dump was instantaneous, overwhelming, and utterly chaotic. Initially, it was met with the expected level of denial. Major news outlets in London, Paris, and New York immediately branded the data as a sophisticated hoax, possibly orchestrated by a state adversary to cause market instability. Anonymous experts hired by governmental agencies provided quick, clean rebuttals, claiming the orbital mechanics were fundamentally flawed or that the cuneiform translations were spurious. However, the sheer volume and technical precision of the raw data proved difficult to dismiss entirely. Within independent academic circles, in universities far from the gravitational pull of centralized government funding, specialists in astrophysics and signal processing began quietly validating Vance's core claims. They confirmed the non-Keplerian trajectory of 3I Atlas and the unmistakable mathematical structure of the embedded signal. The real tipping point came from the geneticists. The detailed specifications of the harvest markers, when run against anonymous global genetic databases, confirmed the existence of a high-priority, engineered strain within the human populace. The implication of genetic manipulation for selective harvesting, the ultimate cosmic farming operation, sent shockwaves through the biological and ethical communities. Vance and MacLeod were now operating from a reinforced sea cave further along the Barra coast, relying on MacLeod's detailed knowledge of the coastal caves and the generous, albeit covert, assistance of the fiercely independent local fishing community. Vance monitored the fallout via satellite link, his heart heavy with the news of Finch's fate. MacLeod confirmed the MOD had sealed the initial cottage area, but the official story was a tragic fire caused by faulty electrical wiring, with Professor Finch listed as deceased in the blaze. A neat, official erasure. The MOD, failing to contain the digital spread, switched tactics. They didn't try to debunk the existence of the data anymore. They shifted the narrative focus to interpretation. The official line, subtly disseminated via social media bots and compliant news outlets, was that 3I Atlas was a natural phenomenon whose strange signal was merely a product of complex magnetic resonance, and that the Anunnaki translation was a wild, alarmist misinterpretation by a mentally unstable Dr. Vance. Vance knew this narrative shift was brilliant in its cruelty. It acknowledged the data's existence while stripping it of its existential threat. It allowed people to acknowledge the possibility of alien life while keeping them safe, docile, and unprepared for the dark cycle. He needed a decisive visual confirmation, something that proved the intentionality of the Anunnaki's actions, something that linked the current astronomical event to the ancient sites. He focused on the Stonehenge schematics again. The sequence demanded specific energy input from the approaching body. Vance calculated that the initial low-frequency command should hit the Earth's magnetic field within 72 hours, triggering a preparatory spike in localized electromagnetic activity around the UK's ancient megaliths. He needed proof of this spike. MacLeod, ever resourceful, managed to salvage a highly sensitive magnetometer from a decommissioned research vessel in the Outer Hebrides. They installed it on a nearby hilltop, connecting it to Vance's system via a rugged, kilometer-long fiber optic cable, buried shallowly beneath the peat. For 2 days, they waited, watching the monotonous, low-level fluctuation of the Earth's magnetic field, the steady heartbeat of the planet. Vance knew that if he was right, that gentle rhythm was about to be interrupted by a violent arrhythmia. On the 3rd day, at 14:17 GMT, the computer screen flared bright red. The magnetic field around the sensor location didn't just fluctuate, it spiked, a sharp, immense jump in magnetic field intensity that lasted for precisely 36 seconds, the exact duration predicted by the Anunnaki command sequence for activating a dormant relay. Vance checked the geographical coordinates of the spike's origin, triangulated by a network of secondary magnetometers Finch had previously installed across the highlands. The source of the intense, focused energy was undeniably the Salisbury Plain. "It's begun," Vance whispered, staring at the screen. "They've pinged Stonehenge. The relay is active." The implication was terrifying. The ancient sites were not passive monuments. They were now conduits for cosmic power, receiving the initial instructions from a body 15 astronomical units away. This magnetic spike, verifiable by any researcher who bothered to check the global geomagnetic records, was the irrefutable evidence Vance needed. It tied the astronomical data, 3I Atlas's trajectory, directly to the mythological history, the Stonehenge relay, and the immediate physical threat, the activation of the EMP weapon. He immediately prepared a small, targeted data packet containing the magnetometer recordings, juxtaposed with the corresponding segment of the Anunnaki signals activation command. He called this final piece of evidence the geomagnetic echo. He used his last secure channel to leak this data to a few trusted independent scientists he knew were already leaning towards validating Prometheus. He didn't trust the mainstream media to report it accurately. He trusted the integrity of scientific data to compel belief. The race was no longer to warn the world, but to ensure the global scientific community mobilized before the full force of the dark cycle hit. Time was running out, and the ancient engine of destruction was turning. The activation of Stonehenge was the final, undeniable sign. If you were a world leader, what would you do when the Earth itself started to vibrate to an alien tune? If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this narrative has struck a chord. Then strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this deep revelation. The release of the geomagnetic echo data triggered the true global cascade Vance had hoped for. The data was too precise, too synchronized with the known trajectory of 3I Atlas. Independent physicists, initially skeptical, could no longer ignore the correlation between the massive energy spike originating from the Salisbury Plain and the calculated timing of the Anunnaki's initial terrestrial command. Panic began to surface not in the general populace, who largely remained confused by the technical jargon and conflicting media reports, but within the high corridors of power. Governments had been preparing covertly, initiating what they called deep continuity projects, disguised as infrastructure development. Vance had seen the schematics for vast subterranean bunkers, designed not for nuclear fallout, but for tectonic resilience. Now these projects accelerated into frantic hidden overdrive. Vance and MacLeod, monitoring global seismic data from the cave, saw the subtle but unmistakable increase in microseismic activity. The planet was becoming restless, reacting to the gravitational tug of the rapidly approaching object. Vance felt a grim satisfaction as he watched reports of unusual military movements in remote parts of the globe. Massive equipment convoys moving through the Chilean Andes, sudden maintenance shutdowns of crucial communication links near ancient sites in China, and the bizarre rapid construction of heavily shielded structures beneath major UK cities. They were not trying to save humanity, they were trying to save themselves and their assets, confirming the Anunnaki's long-term harvest strategy. MacLeod brought news from a fisherman friend who'd been approached by agents demanding to know the location of the fugitive scientist. MacLeod had successfully misled them, sending them on a wild goose chase towards the Shetland Islands. "They're getting desperate, Elias." "The noose is tightening," MacLeod warned, sharpening a small knife on a whetstone. Vance knew he couldn't stay on Barra much longer. The island was too small, too easily contained once they committed serious resources, but he had one final critical calculation to make. He needed to pinpoint the exact arrival zero, the moment of catastrophic gravitational influence. The trajectory data of 3I Atlas was now precise enough to allow for a terrifyingly specific prediction. He spent the next 48 hours running complex Monte Carlo simulations on the impact probability, factoring in the influence of the inner planets. The computer cluster whirred ceaselessly in the damp cave air. The final calculation was chilling in its stark simplicity. The point of no return, the moment when 3I Atlas's gravitational influence would be sufficient to initiate the 26-degree pole shift, regardless of any human intervention, was exactly 42 days, 11 hours, and 34 minutes from the present moment. 42 days, 6 weeks, a single British school term. That was all the time humanity had left before the controlled cataclysm. Vance realized his broadcast had not primarily been about prevention. It was about giving people 42 days to prepare, to find higher ground, to stock provisions, or simply to spend their last weeks with dignity, knowing why the sky was falling. He compiled a brief, urgent follow-up broadcast, focused purely on the time and the immediate visible signs of the impending crisis. Shifting geomagnetic poles, increasing volcanic activity, already discreetly reported in isolated areas, and the strange metallic haze that would soon begin to color the twilight skies as 3I Atlas shed its cloaking dust and became visible to the naked eye. But before he could broadcast, MacLeod rushed into the cave, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. "A patrol boat, Elias, not the local Coast Guard. MOD markings. They've sealed the Minch. We're boxed in." Vance immediately killed the power to the generators. The cave plunged into absolute suffocating darkness, broken only by the faint light of the laptop screen. The rumble of the patrol boat's engine approached, slow and methodical. They were sweeping the coast with sonar, searching for hidden inlets and any sign of human activity. They were trapped. Vance looked at MacLeod. "The data keys." "You must take them, MacLeod. If I'm captured, you continue the broadcast." "I'm a fisherman, Elias, not a scientist," MacLeod protested gruffly. "You are a survivor, and you know the coast. You can reach Ireland, maybe. Just deliver the message," Vance insisted, pressing the titanium drives into MacLeod's calloused hand. The patrol boat idled directly outside the hidden cove entrance, its powerful engine throbbing through the water and the stone. They heard muffled voices, sharp and authoritative, speaking in clipped military tones. Vance knew he had to draw the fire away from the drives and MacLeod. He had one last piece of technology, a highly advanced prototype distress beacon Finch had given him. It was designed to emit a signature that mimicked a rapidly descending aircraft, a powerful, distracting signal. Vance activated the beacon, setting it to transmit from a small, rocky islet half a kilometer away. He launched it through a small drainage channel, watching the small device skip across the surface of the water towards the target islet. The patrol boat reacted instantly, its engine roaring as it peeled away from the cove entrance, heading straight for the decoy signal. "Go, MacLeod, now," Vance urged. MacLeod hesitated for a moment, a look of respect and deep sorrow in his eyes. He gave a sharp nod, slipping silently into the water, heading in the opposite direction, toward the open, dark sea. Vance was now alone, waiting in the darkness of the ancient cave, listening to the fading sound of the patrol boat. He had bought MacLeod time, but he had sealed his own fate. His final act would be to ensure the message was delivered, even if he didn't live to see the dawn of the dark cycle. The silence that followed MacLeod's departure was profound, broken only by the drip of moisture from the cave ceiling and the faint electrical hum of Vance's running laptop. The patrol boat was distracted, but the window of opportunity was tight. They would quickly discover the decoy beacon and return with focused, deadly intent. Vance used the remaining time to finalize the last, most crucial part of his message: the astronomical coordinates for viewing 3I Atlas. He had calculated the precise moment and location where the object, shedding its dusty cloak due to solar heat and orbital friction, would become visible to the naked eye for the first time, a chilling, undeniable celestial event. The calculations indicated that within 48 hours, looking towards the southern celestial sphere, the public would see a strange, reddish object moving against the predictable backdrop of the stars. It wouldn't look like a comet or a planet. It would look like a colossal, heavily armored sphere, the Nibiru fortress, finally revealing its true, terrifying form. Vance encoded this precise observation data into a short video file, a final direct address to the global audience. He spoke in a measured, calm tone, devoid of the panic he felt, simply presenting the facts, the time, the coordinates, and the confirmation that what they would soon see was the instrument of the dark cycle. He knew he couldn't broadcast from the cave again. The risk was too high. He needed to find a different, more secure, and perhaps final transmission point. He carefully secured his laptop and began the long, quiet climb out of the cave system, moving inland towards the highest point of Bara. The cold night air was a sharp shock to his system. As he walked, his mind drifted to the Anunnaki schematics for the genetic seed vaults, the massive underground structures designed to house and preserve selected genetic material during the cataclysm. These vaults, detailed in the Prometheus data, were located beneath the most geographically stable areas of the planet, particularly in deep, crystalline rock formations. One such location, according to the decoded coordinates, was buried beneath the remote region of Antarctica, a place currently under intense international scrutiny for environmental research, but, Vance knew, was actually a covert staging ground. The sheer level of planning and coordination required for this multi-millennial operation was staggering. It wasn't just an advanced race, it was an eternal empire, treating the Earth as a renewable resource colony. Vance reached the high moorland, the ground rough and uneven. He stopped to listen. Silence. The military presence was currently focused on the coastline, searching for MacLeod and the decoy. He found an old, dilapidated shepherd's hut, a stone structure with a collapsed roof, offering minimal cover but an unobstructed view of the sky. This would be his final staging area. He needed a final method of transmission. He couldn't use the satellite system. It was too easily tracked. He settled on a desperate, low-tech solution, a high-powered, short-range Wi-Fi burst aimed at maximizing signal penetration into the nearby mainland, hoping to saturate the local network long enough for the video message to proliferate before being shut down. He began configuring his laptop as an improvised broadcast server, amplifying the signal using a jury-rigged parabolic reflector made from salvaged marine scrap. It was crude, but highly directional. As he worked, he reflected on the framework of generation, the idea that the truth must be presented not as an end, but as a bridge. He was laying the final plank of that bridge. He had provided the scientific proof, the historical context, and now the specific, verifiable visual confirmation. He knew his time was running out. He could already hear the distant low thrum of the returning patrol boat. They would soon locate the shepherd's hut, the only point of elevation in the immediate vicinity. Vance felt a deep, profound tiredness, the kind that settles into the bone marrow. He was cold, hungry, and facing certain capture, but he was not defeated. He typed the final sentence of his video caption, "Look up, the lie ends in 48 hours." He checked the battery life. Barely enough for one high-powered burst transmission. He needed the timing to be perfect, a window of minimum network traffic, maximum dissemination chance. He set the timer for 10 minutes. The transmission would saturate the small island's fiber optic connection, bouncing the video file onto the global internet via the mainland trunk lines. He stood up, stretching his aching limbs, and looked out over the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic. The stars were brilliant, cold, and silent observers. He closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of Professor Finch, of his colleagues back in Cambridge, and of the millions of ordinary people in the UK and around the world, completely oblivious to the cosmic clock rapidly winding down. This was his final message. The fate of the truth and the chance for preparation was now literally airborne. Have you ever considered that the greatest threat to humanity might not be external forces, but our own ingrained habit of disbelief? If this content has truly opened your mind, comment below, "I made it to the end." This helps me understand who is genuinely seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell because the next episodes go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking the next video. It is the continuation of this crucial journey. The timer counted down silently on the laptop screen. 09:45. Vance could now clearly distinguish the distinct, rhythmic chop of a helicopter approaching from the mainland, a different sound signature from the earlier patrol boat. This was likely the extraction or elimination team. They were bringing in the heavy hitters. He focused on the small flickering light on the parabolic reflector, confirming the directional signal was locked onto the nearest mainland relay tower. Every joule of battery power was being directed into this single, final burst. The narrative of his life had come down to this solitary, cold night in a ruined shepherd's hut, his final act against a multi-millennial conspiracy. He recalled the chilling precision of the Anunnaki schedule, 42 days until the catastrophic pole shift. The geological stress was already building. The seismic anomalies he monitored confirmed that the Earth's inner core was subtly reacting to the immense gravitational influence of 3I Atlas. Vance sat down heavily on a rough stone, waiting. He imagined the scene about to unfold when the video hit the internet. The sudden spike in traffic, the frantic efforts by global intelligence agencies to scrub the content, and the inevitable, rapid descent into total global chaos. Once the masses understood, they had only 6 weeks to prepare for the end of civilization as they knew it. The helicopter was close now, its blades whipping the air into a frenzy, pushing a wave of cold wind and dust through the open roof of the hut. They had found him. Vance looked at the timer, 03:12. He secured the laptop, physically disconnecting the power source to ensure no residual data could be extracted by his captors. He would surrender the shell of the machine, but the data, the final video, was already scheduled for release. He stood in the center of the hut, a small, weary figure against the backdrop of ancient stone and the overwhelming threat of the future. He didn't try to hide or escape. He had achieved his objective. The helicopter descended rapidly, settling just outside the hut, its powerful light blinding him. He could hear the heavy thud of boots hitting the moorland and the metallic clack-clack of weapons being readied. A voice, amplified and authoritative, cut through the rotor wash. "Doctor, Elias Vance, put your hands in the air and drop any device you are holding. You are under arrest for treason and the attempted destabilization of the realm." Vance raised his empty hands slowly, feeling the cold Scottish air on his skin. He had no device, no weapon, only the truth lodged firmly in the global data stream. He maintained eye contact with the lead operative, a tall man in full tactical gear, whose face was obscured by a dark visor. "The realm is irrelevant," Vance shouted over the roar of the helicopter. "The planet is scheduled for a reset. You are arresting the warning." The lead operative ignored him, gesturing sharply. Two other figures moved to restrain Vance, their movements clinical and brutal. They frisked him thoroughly, seizing the useless laptop shell. Vance focused on the digital timer, counting down in his head. 1 minute. As they dragged him towards the waiting helicopter, Vance caught a final glimpse of the digital world, reflected in the small screen of a device held by one of the operatives. The time flashed. 00:10. Then he heard the faint, high-pitched ping from the direction of the mainland relay. The burst transmission had executed perfectly. The video was out. Vance allowed a small, tired smile to touch his lips, just as the operatives roughly shoved him into the belly of the helicopter. The door slammed shut, cutting off the view of the ancient, watchful sky. His last sensory input was the heavy scent of kerosene and the cold reality of capture, but it was accompanied by the silent, internal echo of his triumph. The world knew. Dr. Elias Vance was taken into deep custody, classified as a Level 1 security threat. He disappeared into the labyrinthine world of highly classified UK facilities, likely an underground bunker beneath the Ministry of Defence headquarters in Whitehall, one of the very structures designed to weather the approaching dark cycle. His broadcast, however, could not be contained. The final video message, "Look up, the lie ends in 48 hours, went viral with unprecedented speed. The undeniable synchronicity between the geomagnetic echo, the Prometheus data, and Vance's calm, final warning shattered the manufactured disbelief. 48 hours after Vance's capture, the world looked up. Against the familiar tapestry of the stars, a new object emerged. It was not the fast-moving blur of a comet, nor the distant twinkle of a planet. It was a dense, reddish-brown sphere, massive in scale, moving with an imposing, steady velocity. It looked exactly as Vance had predicted, a heavily armored, spherical vessel shedding the last remnants of its icy camouflage. Nibiru, the winged orb, was finally visible. The scientific community, no longer able to hide behind statistical deniability, collapsed into chaos. The sheer visual proof, the confirmation of the ancient prophecies and Vance's mathematical predictions, forced governments globally to admit, in vague, panicked press conferences, that a significant astronomical event was imminent. But the admission came too late. Only 40 days remained until arrival zero. The global economy evaporated overnight. Order broke down as the true scale of the existential threat permeated the collective consciousness. The carefully managed cover-up by the elite, designed to ensure their quiet survival, was now exposed, fueling widespread rage and terminal panic. Vance, confined in the sterile, soundproof environment of his underground cell, was likely unaware of the precise chaos his actions had unleashed. He was questioned endlessly, not about if the Anunnaki were real, but about how he accessed the proprietary data and, more critically, whether he had found a vulnerability in the Dark Cycle protocol. He had not. The Anunnaki mechanism was flawless. The final weeks of humanity's normal existence were a blur of desperate construction, futile evacuation attempts, and the final, chilling sight of Nibiru dominating the night sky, a silent, colossal reminder of the impending reckoning. The world felt quiet, a temporary cessation of noise before the final scream. The narrative of the Anunnaki signal, the 3,600-year lie, had been fully exposed. Humanity had been given its warning, its slim chance to prepare, thanks to the relentless efforts of a disgraced British astrophysicist and his eccentric Scottish mentor. The final act of the dark cycle was approaching. Vance had calculated the moment the gravitational tipping point would occur, a precise second in the near future. The seas would begin to rise, the land would buckle, and the ancient electromagnetic relays at Stonehenge and other sites would explode into a final deafening burst, silencing the modern world forever. The journey of Dr. Elias Vance ends not with triumph, but with disclosure. He failed to stop the cataclysm, but he succeeded in ending the lie. The coming apocalypse would be faced not in ignorance, but with the full, terrifying clarity of cosmic truth. And as the great red sphere of Nibiru looms ever closer, casting a strange, otherworldly glow upon the terrified faces of the few still watching, we must ask the final, terrifying question: what will the new world look like when the gods return to their garden?